Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your extraordinary courtesy. Mr. Chairman, in the light of today's hearing, I would hope several things that have come out both in the South Mississippi Sun-Herald and the Times-Picayune articles that have been published as recently as today that call into mind apparently the widespread misuse of the National Flood Insurance Program. If you were to read the Sun-Herald on a daily basis, you'll hear horror stories of how individuals have been ruled in court to have been cheated out of their homeowners' policies. If you read the Times-Picayune, it leads to a slightly similar and slightly different conclusion, that in the course of telling individuals that your plan isn't going to pay there's all flood, that the taxpayers have been stuck with the tab for claims that should have been paid by the private sector. Mr. Chairman, in light of today's article in the Times-Picayune, I would ask that this committee subpoena records of a September 7th, 2005 meeting between Administrator of the Flood Program, David Marstead, and approximately 300 insurance agents, in which he outlined the National Flood Insurance Program's attitude towards the whole wind versus water. Because based on something that Mr. Marstead said in this room, where he said, I instructed them whenever there was wind and water to pay the flood claim in full, I'm not sure he's got the legal authority to do that. The way I read the United States Code, it says, and I'm reading 44 CFR 62.23, the entire responsibility for providing a proper adjustment of combined wind and water claims and flood and loan claims is the responsibility of the Write Your Own company, which is a private sector company which has been hired to sell the policy and adjudicate the claim. It's further complicated by a memo of the State Farm Insurance Company dated September 13th of 2005, and I'm quoting where they say, where wind acts concurrently with flooding to cause damage to the insured property, coverage for the loss exists only under flood coverage. So on one hand, the United States Code gives them the responsibility to sell the policy and adjudicate the claim, and yet a State Farm memo to its agents tells them that whenever there's wind and water, blame it all on the water. So if that person who had a homeowner's policy, they suddenly were not going to get paid on that homeowner's policy. But for individuals who are taxpayers who don't live in the affected area, suddenly we see a circumstance where we feel like the federal government has been billed for claims that should have been paid by the private sector. I would also like to enter for the record a series of articles from the Times-Picayune where it spells out that homes that had zero flood damage still billed the National Flood Insurance Program $80,000, $100,000, $150,000, whatever the private sector felt like they could stick the taxpayers with. Again, this leads to a series of troubling situations in which some attorneys in the Louisiana area have filed suit just last week under the Fraudulent Claims Act, claiming that possibly billions of dollars of claims that should have been paid by the private sector are being paid for by the National Flood Insurance Program. And Mr. Chairman, I'm, as a representative of the coastal area, pleased that I didn't have a single complaint from individual homeowners who felt like their flood insurance program wasn't fair with them. I think that's a good thing. On the flip side, I've had thousands of complaints from homeowners who said, I built my house the way they told me to, I paid my premium, and when the day came to file my homeowner's claim, I was told that because I couldn't prove whether the wind got there first or the water got there first, that I would be receiving nothing on my homeowner's policy. In fact, in one of the more interesting cases involves a doctor who lives 100 yards from me, who for years was an advocate of tort reform, who is now on a commercial calling for insurance reform after his almost $900,000 policy was not paid by State Farm. So, Mr. Chairman, I think there's some very interesting questions that involve individuals and their policies, that involve Americans collectively, and certainly something that on behalf of the 52% of all Americans who live in a coastal community who, if it hasn't happened to them yet, could certainly happen to them next. These are the sort of questions that I hope this committee and other committees in Congress can get an answer to. Thank you very much for letting me participate.